She has been coming to the Summerfest since she was a baby. I remember her as a baby. She grew up here at the Summerfest. She's been vegan since birth. And she is grown up now. She's a vegan educator and a public speaker and a liberation activist. She has traveled the country in her van, speaking out, raising awareness about the ethical and environmental and health impacts of our food choices. She speaks at schools and universities and conferences and activist groups. She is a strong, clear voice, wonderful public speaker. We are so honored to have her here now, Sarina Farb.
Thank you, Mary Beth. Beautiful introduction. I'm so excited to be here today, back at Summerfest with all of you. I have an entirely new presentation that I've never given before, and I have been kind of trying to change a little bit of how I do my talks. I always used to be very heavy on the studies and information and statistics, and as I have been evolving in my approach, I've been trying to be more heart-centered in some of my speeches and telling more stories. So I'm going to be doing a lot of that today, hopefully. We'll see how it goes. So I'm going to be talking about more than a boycott today. What I mean by that is how we approach veganism and how we think about it. And so a lot of today's talk and the heart-centeredness is going to come from my personal evolution and some of the internal struggles in my head and my feelings over the years. You might recognize one of the people in this photo here. He was just up on stage a minute ago. That is Dr. Neil Bernard about 30 years ago. And that's me right there, the baby, with my father. So I was born and raised vegan, as Mary Beth mentioned. And not just vegan, but I was raised with a big activist mentality from a very young age. And I really took that to heart. I was a huge animal lover. That cat there is Maple, who I named because he was sweet like maple syrup. That was 6-year-old me. And so I've always been a huge animal lover. And when my parents taught me the truth about what happens in our food system, and they use very age-appropriate language, such as, we love animals, we don't eat them. And cow's milk is for baby cows. It made perfect sense to me as a small child. I really took it to heart, and I really went out there trying to teach other people this. And it makes sense when you're a small child and you're told, we love animals, we don't eat them. And I believe that. And then I look around and I saw friends and family members and other people eating animals. I felt very confused. And I felt like, why don't they love animals too? And when I bring this up with my parents or other people, it was kind of framed as, well, we know this information. We know what happens to animals. They don't. So to me, it was obvious. It was like, well, I have to tell everyone then. Duh. And so I became an activist at a very young age. This is someone else you may recognize, veteran Summerfest person, Ann Dinshaw here. This was one of my first speaking things I did. Not Summerfest, this was a different vegan conference, but much younger then. And I've been speaking up for animals and the environment and our planet for a long time. I can remember one really good example of my confusion at the world. I was about 7 years old. I was on a competitive gymnastics team, and we would get these goodie bags at our competitions that were filled with candies. And I'd go through them, reading the labels, going, nope, not vegan, and handing out the non-vegan candy to my friends. One of my peers on the team asked me one day and said, oh, why can't you eat this? And first I responded, I can, I choose not to. I proceeded to read the label and tell her, well, it has gelatin in it. Do you know what gelatin is? And she said, no. And for those of you that don't know what gelatin is, it is a very gross, disturbing byproduct of the animal agriculture industry. It is all of the leftover slaughterhouse byproducts, blood, bones, cartilage, tissue, kind of all boiled down and then used in things like candy. And so I proceeded to describe to her in graphic detail exactly what gelatin was and how it was made. And what really stands out to me about this experience is I remember she looked at me, she paused for a second, and then she goes, oh, whatever, and popped the candy in her mouth. And that was a first little shock to my innocent brain that believed that with information, people would change. And I was like, what? I just told you this information. How could that not gross you out or disturb you? But I didn't think a whole lot of it at the time, and I continued with my activism through the years, really deeply holding on to this belief that we truly can change things as individuals, and that our choices really do make a difference, and that information is what leads to change. This is me in college. She's unfortunately not here this year, and we miss her very much, but that is Ray Sikora, who has been a longtime Summerfest attendee. I brought her to speak on my college campus about 10 years ago. And the other picture is some of the types of tabling I did. You can see the great aesthetic back then with all of the cardboard and hand-printed, put-together posters and designs. But I did all kinds of outreach. However, I actually went to college incredibly naive, I believe. I went in with this really heartfelt passion and belief, again, that I could change the world. Now, just to back up for a second here, my dream when I was 6, 7 years old was to be an activist in all kinds of things, but in particular, I used to have this dream that I wanted to out-tree sit Julia Butterfly Hill one day. So if you're familiar with Julia Butterfly Hill, she lived for nearly 2 years in a giant redwood in California, never climbing out of it, literally lived in it completely for 2 years to save it from being cut down. And I would read and hear stories like this, and that was my vision of what I wanted to be and do when I grew up. It was, well, I want to save more trees. I want to live in a tree longer. I want to stand in front of a bulldozer. A very unique child, to say the least. So I go to college, and I went to a private liberal arts college that had a history of social justice and activism, particularly for human rights causes. It had been a stop on the Underground Railroad in the time of slavery, and had been very abolitionist, had been very progressive on women's rights, lots of different social justice issues. And environmental issues as well. They were having a lot of environmental activism and protests on campus to encourage the college to divest from fossil fuels. They actually had an entire vegan bar in line when I went there, so I didn't even have to negotiate or worry about bringing my own food or figuring out what to do. So I thought, great, this is such a progressive campus. They just don't have an animal rights group or any animal rights activists or vegans right now. I'm going to show up on campus, and all I'm going to do is tell all of these progressive human rights and environmental and social justice activists about animal rights and veganism and the importance of a plant-based food system, and they're going to jump on board with my cause too, and we're going to create the first vegan university in the United States. That was my headspace as an 18-year-old. Suffice it to say, I have grown a lot more jaded over the years, and I have realized that information and sharing facts does not always lead to change. It is a lot more complicated than this. There's a lot more psychology and sociology, social factors, and many other things that impact why and when people change their behavior or beliefs. But it took me a while to accept this. And particularly in college and in some of my earlier activism days, I had a lot of attachment to the outcome of what I did. So I would hold a documentary screening, or I would do tabling like this, talk to someone, show graphic footage or slaughterhouse footage to a friend, and again, have that hope of I'm telling them this information, they're gonna see the truth, and they're gonna wanna change. And I was disappointed and heartbroken time and again, and it would be so frustrating, and it hurt relationships. It made me miserable at times. It made me heartbroken every time I had this attachment to the outcome of my actions. And that has been something I've been grappling with over the years. And I've come to a new understanding now, which is part of what has influenced today's presentation. Over the years, part of what led to feeling more burnt out and frustrated is that even with all the progress I've seen over the years, even with all of the explosion of plant-based foods and more medical professionals that understand the importance of this lifestyle from a health perspective. All of the changes, the number of vegans and vegan options, which all are incredibly positive. At the same time, we have a growing environmental crisis that all of these things have one major driver that is contributing more to all of these than any other thing, which is animal agriculture. And we continue to increase the number of animals we kill every year. 70 billion. This is the number of land animals that we raise and kill for food every single year around the world. We kill animals at such a rapid rate that if we killed humans at the same rate, all humans on the planet would be dead in about 2 weeks. And these numbers continue to go up. Per capita meat consumption has been increasing over the years. So again, I'm having all these feelings about activism and attachment to change and outcome, trying to stay hopeful, being very excited by all the positive changes in the vegan world, and yet seeing this reality happening at the same time. There's this idea that is promoted by a lot of people and organizations, both within the vegan movement and in the mainstream world, that when it comes to these, in particular, the environmental and ethical reasons to eat a plant-based diet, you just heard a lot about the health side, so I'm not talking about that so much today. But from an environmental and ethical perspective, a lot of people have put out this idea that the importance of eating a plant-based diet or living a vegan lifestyle is that it's essentially a boycott of these industries. And it's been positioned this way. So what do I mean by a boycott? I mean things like this, which we of course would love to be true, that say things like, every day a vegan saves this number of animals. Things such as, outside of the movement, the Organic Consumers Union specifically saying that we need to boycott meat to save the rainforest, to save the Amazon. Because again, animal agriculture is one of the biggest drivers of deforestation. This is Project Drawdown, which is a mainstream environmental organization that comes up with their top 10 suggestions for what we as individuals and as a society can do to draw down climate emissions. And it's incredibly positive that they've started including adopting plant-forward or plant-based diets as one of their suggestions for what we can do. However, all of these are still positioning our choice to not eat animals as a boycott. This idea, essentially, it comes down to this idea of voting with your dollar. And I want this to be true. I really do. And in many ways, it is. But I think that if we can move beyond this idea of a boycott, move beyond the idea that the power of our diet and our choices and our lifestyle, that the impact of that, and measuring the direct impact and seeing that it changes things on the shelves immediately or increases the number of vegan products available or served or options, I think if we can move beyond that idea, and I'm going to say more about that in a minute, to a deeper understanding of the power of veganism, I think not only will it help us be more effective in spreading this message to the world, but I also think it will help us gain an inner peace and kind of let go of our attachment to things that we can't control, and help us be more sustainable, more peaceful, compassionate, and hopeful individuals and activists too. Here's why I say I would love for the idea that voting with our dollar works, but honestly, I don't always think it does. And I think we need to accept this and grapple with what that means rather than trying to ignore it. And here's one of the main reasons why. How many of you, just by show of hands, are familiar with the subsidies that go to animal agriculture? So we're all pretty familiar, but some of these statistics I think are just shocking, and we are not talking about them enough, right? So in 2018, 42% of the dairy industry revenue came from our tax dollars via the government. So if we truly had a system that was based on supply and demand and voting with our dollar really worked, the dairy industry would be dying because people are voting with their dollar and they are not buying dairy. They're choosing more and more dairy alternatives and non-dairy products. But the dairy industry and their production levels are not currently reflecting this because our tax dollars are going to quite literally pay them out and buy the excess that they are producing. So the USDA bought $120 million of milk in 2020, and under the COVID Stimulus Act, they received $2.9 billion in direct payments, dairy farmers did. And this chart is a really good chart. It's from the Agriculture Fairness Alliance, which is a plant-based and vegan lobbying group working to change the Farm Bill and change these subsidies and this rigged system. But their research shows that 92% of subsidies have been going to animal agriculture, and very little go to fruits and vegetables and plant-based human foods. So things like this are happening. So if we focus solely on measuring the outcome of our actions, seeing the direct impact in the world, we can look at it and feel more hopeless, which is why I think we need to accept this and find a different way to look at it. When I'm out in the world talking to people about veganism who aren't familiar with the health benefits or other parts of this as well, they come to me and they say, my choices don't make a difference. We have a rigged system. Why does it matter what I do as an individual? And I think what we do as individuals does matter, but not only because of voting with our dollar. I want to remind everyone too, when we think about the 70 billion land animals that are raised and killed for food every year, it's really hard to wrap our minds as humans around these numbers, and that's 70 billion sentient feeling beings that long to live and want to play, enjoy, have pleasure and fun and emotions and love their babies. So just to remind everyone of that, I have two quick, very short videos I want to show you. This is Wally. He is my parents' dog. He's my, sibling, my non-human sibling we'll go with. He is wonderful and shows us the joy that these individuals we share this planet with have and want to do. So this is actually him playing tetherball.
Okay, go get the ball. Okay, go get it. Go get that ball. Yeah.
And a lot of us know what this is like with cats and dogs, especially even if you're not vegan or not eating plants. Most of us, particularly in America, understand that cats and dogs feel pain and suffer and are aware, want to play, have fun. And we forget or don't think about the fact that this is true for cows and pigs and chickens, turkeys, even fish we're learning more and more about, and insects, if you were here for Jonathan Balcom's lectures. And a cow also playing with a ball and seeing joy and fun here, which we don't often see or think about as much. And I think this is really important to remember when we're talking about why our actions and choices do matter. So, playing fetch just like a dog would. All right. To understand how we move beyond this boycott model to a different understanding of veganism, I'm going to ask you to imagine a different scenario. Let's all imagine right now that us here, each of us as individuals, with our thoughts, our feelings, our beliefs, our understandings right now, are transported to a time and a place where stonings are a legal and socially acceptable form of punishment for, say, something like adultery. So let's say you're transported to this place, you find yourself standing in front of a situation where there is a woman in a circle surrounded by 1,000 people, each with a single stone in their hand that they're all getting ready to throw at her. And you realize you're in this society, you're transported to this place, you have a choice. Do you pick up a stone, join in the crowd and the mob mentality, or not? And you recognize that there's 1,000 other people, each with a stone. Whether or not you pick up a stone and join in and throw it at this woman or not, she is still going to suffer and die an excruciating and painful death. And I think it's obvious when we look at this situation and ask ourselves what we would do, we would all say, of course not. It's morally wrong to participate in that. I see an injustice. I have a responsibility as a thoughtful, caring individual not to participate in that. And we would say that regardless of that direct physical outcome. Like, we may not stop any suffering from happening, we may not stop the situation or anyone else, but we still have that choice and that power within us. And now let's say, in that moment, we don't stop that one. Fast forward a few months or a year, maybe there were people around us who noticed that we didn't pick up that stone and join in the crowd mentality. And a couple months later, another situation in this society or place comes up, and more individuals are like, well, I saw that person didn't throw a stone, I'm not going to either. And the group of individuals not participating in this injustice is bigger than it was before. And maybe again, it doesn't actually change in that moment the direct physical suffering and experience of this woman. And maybe this goes on for a few years or a while until eventually some kind of tipping point is reached where so many people, this idea that we don't have to participate in this has spread, and so many people are now not participating in it that all of a sudden it goes from these stonings happening to them not happening. And that's called a paradigm shift. And when we start to look at and understand veganism as this principle of non-exploitation, of non-violence, and of justice, about these sentient feeling individuals who want to live free from pain and suffering. And when we understand it's about them, we can start to embody and see this principle better, that we each have an obligation to do our best to live without causing unnecessary harm and suffering in the world. And when we focus it internally on our obligation and living in alignment with our values, if we say we care about peace and justice and nonviolence, and then we do our best to actually live in alignment with that has this incredible power to create a ripple effect and transform a paradigm in society, one that is currently based on, I call it, normalized violence. We have a system built on the exploitation of people, of animals, of the planet that we live on. And it's so normalized that most of the world doesn't see it as violence, doesn't question it, or even recognize it. So it's this built-in system of normalized violence. And once we start to live in alignment with our values and point it out and say, hey, that's a system of violence I'm not going to participate in, we start to change the mentality and paradigm in society until we can create this tipping point. And there's actually social change research that suggests that it does not take a majority, but that it takes somewhere between 15 to 25% of the population to create a paradigm shift. And that once you reach this tipping point, and it's an estimate and a range that we're not sure of for sure, but when we reach somewhere between this range, a percentage of the population that strongly hold a belief or idea, such as the idea that it's wrong to hurt animals unnecessarily, and that we can eat plant-based foods instead of animals, that there can be this rapid change that no one really saw coming. So change isn't necessarily this, linear model that we often think it is, and we might not be able to see these changes or impacts. And often it can look like the opposite, such as the increasing per capita meat consumption, the increasing environmental crisis. And then when we hit this tipping point, suddenly things can change very quickly. And that gives me a lot of hope thinking about that paradigm shift. Something else I want to talk about quickly here is this idea of systemic versus individual change. It has gotten really popular recently, especially in environmental circles, for people to share this idea of what I do as an individual doesn't make a difference. We shouldn't really be blaming individuals or holding them accountable. It's the corporations, it's the governments, it's the CEOs, it's the billionaires. We should be holding them accountable and blaming them. And they'll share articles like this article from The Guardian that says just 100 companies are responsible for the majority of global greenhouse gas emissions. But the problem with this mentality is severalfold. One, it absolves the individual of responsibility. It pushes off the causing change in society to someone else. And it allows us to point a finger while ignoring our power. And it also ignores that systems are made up of individuals. If we think about it, if we ourselves are unwilling to change, if we ourselves are unwilling to trade, a beef burger for a bean burrito, or a little bit of an inconvenience here or there to do something different and make a difference, how is it okay to call someone else out, to be like, well, it's too inconvenient for me to make a change, but those CEOs should give up their profits, that corporation should change their model, to care about people and the planet, but not me. It's more important that I have convenience, that I have taste preference, that I fit in with my family or my culture. And it's the same mentality. So change has to start with us. We have to take responsibility for our actions and our choices and live in alignment with our values, or we're asking other people to do things that we're unwilling to do. And that doesn't make us that much different from those CEOs or politicians that put their career or their profits over people. I believe in this idea that we are all walking billboards for our values. Now, as Mary Beth mentioned in the introduction, I actually spent a year living full-time in this van, traveling around speaking about veganism to schools and universities. And I covered it in vegan information. I took the walking billboard idea as far as I possibly could, and I plastered my values on the outside of my home for everyone, pretty much, in the world to see. You don't have to do this to be a walking example of your values, but simply by being who we are, the choices we make, the food we eat, the words we use to speak to each other, the way we treat each other, the way we treat the person standing in front of us in the grocery store line to check out. That is all us living and expressing our values. So if we say one thing, if we say we care about environmentalism, the planet, the animals, and then we're purchasing and eating the bodies of animals or things that are driving deforestation and pollution, we are showing people that we don't actually care about those things that we give lip service to. And so that's a choice that we each have all the time, every single day. And I think that's really powerful. Now, the last thing I'm going to touch on here before I wrap up is this idea of how I've come to accept that we need to let go, that the younger version of me who was so attached to the outcome, that every person or friend I talked to or showed a video to, that I would get so upset and heartbroken when they didn't change or when they didn't act on the information I shared. I was very attached to this outcome. And I think that did cause me a lot of suffering. It made it harder for me to be calm, speak calmly with them, to share information calmly, because I was so emotionally invested. And I've kind of shifted that and found a lot more peace in this idea of all we can do is live our values. It is to be that change. And we can share information, but the reality is we actually can't control anything anyone else does. We can't control the politicians or the governments or the corporations. We can't control anything outside of our own internal experience and brain. And there's a lot of freedom that comes with that. And this is a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, who some of you might be familiar with. He was a vegan monk and has written a bunch of books and has a lot that I think is really beautiful. And I've been getting more into a lot of the ideas of meditation and letting go and kind of building our own internal peace so that we can better change the world. And so this quote of his says, "Letting go gives us freedom, and freedom is the only condition for happiness. If in our heart we still cling to anything, anger, anxiety, or possessions, we cannot be free." And I think this applies so well to our activism, and that if we can take this mindset of, I'm not doing this focused on the outcome. I'm not going to do this measuring how many animals have I saved, how many people have I changed, but rather I do it because I know that it's right. And we do this so that we can take a stand and align our actions with our values, and then let go. I can't control what anybody does with this information. I can't control who changes. I can't control the laws. I can only control my actions. I can share my beliefs and information, and then people will do what they do with it. I'm not going to stop putting my beliefs out there. I'm not going to stop trying to speak up about what is right, but I'm releasing that control. And there's a really good book that I've read recently called Letting Go that kind of speaks about these ideas, not actually in regards to activism at all, but it's something that I've been applying. And I think when we take this view of veganism as being a principle of nonviolence and non-exploitation that isn't directly about trying to control or change or measure the outcomes of the action, but rather we're doing it because we know it's right and we want to live without harming the planet and other beings. I think this is so absolutely incredibly powerful and gives us a great peace and lets us feel more hopeful and happy instead of being depressed at the state of the world all the time or feeling like nothing is ever changing. And so I'll end with one more quote from Thich Nhat Hanh that wraps this up as well. Our own life has to be our message. And that is truly, I believe, the power of veganism and vegan living. So thank you so much. Here's a... Thank you, and if you want to find my website or follow my work or sign up for my email list, you can scan this QR code and find all of those things there. So thank you.
Great. Fantastic.